She thought she bought an ordinary house by the ocean. But beneath the floor was something never meant to be found. The moment she opened the hatch, her life changed forever. Watch till the end. You won't believe how this story ends. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Miriam had imagined this moment so many times that when it finally happened, it felt unreal. The last cardboard box scraped softly across the wooden floor as she pushed it through the doorway of the house she had fought for with every remaining ounce of strength she possessed. The door closed behind her with a dull, final click, sealing her inside. For a brief second she simply stood there, breathing, listening, trying to understand whether this quiet truly belonged to her. Outside, the street was calm. Somewhere beyond the low dunes, the ocean murmured steadily, its distant rhythm filtering through the walls. Pale sunlight slipped through the windows and stretched across the floor like a promise she was afraid to touch. Everything about the moment should have felt like victory. Yet something heavy settled in her chest instead, pressing down with a familiar weight she thought she had learned to live with. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Not unpleasant, just empty. Miriam rested her hands on the top of the box, noticing how they trembled. She told herself it was exhaustion. It had been a long move, a long life. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that the house was watching her, not with menace, but with a kind of withheld awareness, as if it had been waiting to see who would cross its threshold next. Buying this house was supposed to mark the beginning of something better, something earned. For years, Miriam had moved through life bracing for the next blow, the next disappointment, the next door that would close before she could step through it. Standing here now, surrounded by her few belongings, she wondered whether she even remembered how to live without anticipating loss. Her past felt like a corridor of rooms she never wished to revisit. Childhood in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than celebrations. Watching her mother wash other people's clothes for wages that barely stretched from week to week. Dreams that shriveled early because every path forward seemed blocked by money she did not have, or opportunities meant for someone else. Later came marriage, a mistake disguised as rescue. Her husband's charm faded quickly, replaced by cutting reminders of who controlled the money, who made the decisions, who should be grateful. Miriam learned to shrink, to apologize for things that were not her fault, to stretch every dollar until it felt thinner than skin. And when debts piled up and her husband's temper turned sharp and dangerous, she finally understood that the only thing worse than leaving was staying. She walked away with almost nothing except a fragile piece of herself she had thought was gone forever, the part that still believed she deserved more. The years that followed were a relentless battle for stability. She took every shift offered, every extra weekend, every second job she could manage. Offices at night, a small clinic by day, helping elderly patients with tasks no one else wanted. Waiting tables in the evenings until her feet burned. She denied herself comfort, vacations, new clothes, even small indulgences others barely noticed. Every dollar went into savings, into a dream her mother had once whispered to her late at night. A home of her own, something no one could take away. That dream had finally materialized in the form of this modest coastal house. On paper, it was nothing remarkable. Built decades ago, weathered shingles, a yard overgrown with stubborn plants that refused to die even under harsh sea winds. The price alone had made her suspicious. Too low for the area, low enough to raise questions she had been too tired to pursue. The real estate agent had brushed off her concerns with practiced ease, smiling thinly and insisting the house was perfectly ordinary. Miriam had wanted to believe that sometimes good fortune arrived quietly, without hidden costs. She signed the papers before doubt could catch up with her. Her first night in the house was restless. Every board creaked with deliberate precision, as if acknowledging her presence. The wind pressed against the windows with gentle persistence. The distant crash of waves echoed faintly through the walls. Lying in bed, she thought of her mother and imagined her voice murmuring proudly, "You did it. You finally did it." That thought carried her into a shallow sleep. Morning light revealed something else entirely. The house felt too still, not peaceful, but closed, as though it had been holding its breath for a very long time. There was no lingering warmth of previous occupants, no traces of life left behind. It felt untouched, unsmiling, preserved. As she unpacked, moving from room to room, that feeling followed her. In the small storage room near the back of the house, she noticed it most strongly. The space was barely more than a closet. Peeling wallpaper curled away from the corners. A small window refused to open. A heavy old cupboard stood against the far wall, oddly positioned, as if it had been dragged there rather than placed naturally. When Miriam stepped across the floor, something beneath her feet responded differently. A low, hollow sound echoed up through the boards. She paused, stepped again. The sound repeated, deeper than the ordinary creak of an aging house. She crouched and pressed her palm flat against the floor. The wood felt cooler there, disconnected somehow. She told herself it was nothing. Houses settled. Floors aged. Her mind reached for explanations the way a frightened child reached for comfort. But the thought lingered, gnawing quietly at the edges of her attention. The next morning, she returned to the storage room with purpose. She pushed the cupboard aside, surprised by how heavy it was, how firmly it resisted being moved. Beneath it, the carpet looked newer than the rest of the room. Too new. When she pulled it back, she saw a rectangular outline in the floorboards. The nails were shinier, newer than those surrounding them. Her pulse quickened. She knelt and ran her fingers along the edge of one board. A corner lifted slightly under her touch. Using a screwdriver from her toolbox, she pried gently. The board came loose with unsettling ease, revealing dark metal beneath. Miriam froze. She removed more boards, her movements slow and deliberate. Dust rose in pale clouds. When the square was fully exposed, she saw that it was not just metal. It was a hatch, heavy, industrial. Embedded beneath the wooden floor, its handle was thick and cold. The hinges were rusted, but intact. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this. Fresh boards, new carpet, furniture positioned with intent. Miriam sat back on her heels, staring at the hatch as her thoughts raced. Part of her wanted to close everything, to pretend she had never seen it. She had just begun a new life. She did not need a problem buried beneath her home, but she knew herself too well. Ignoring the unknown had never saved her before. As the afternoon light stretched across the room, she stood and wrapped her fingers around the handle. The metal was colder than she expected, sending a sharp chill through her hand. She pulled. The hatch resisted at first, then surrendered with a deep, agonizing creak. Cold, stale air rushed upward, carrying the scent of rust and damp stone. Miriam aimed her flashlight into the darkness. A vertical shaft dropped away beneath her, lined with concrete. A rusted ladder clung to the wall, disappearing into blackness far deeper than her light could reach. She closed the hatch slowly, her heart pounding. Whatever lay beneath her house was not an accident. And as she stepped away, Miriam understood with sudden clarity that the home she had fought so hard to claim was not simply a place to live. It was the beginning of something buried, something patient, something that had been waiting for her to arrive. Miriam did not sleep that night. The image of the hatch followed her every time she closed her eyes. The cold metal, the groan of the hinges, the breath of air rising from below, as if the house itself had exhaled after decades of silence. She lay in bed listening to the ocean beyond the dunes and the soft ticking of the house settling, aware now that those sounds were layered over something else, something hollow beneath her feet. By morning, the fear had sharpened into resolve. She moved carefully, deliberately, packing a backpack with what she thought she might need. A stronger flashlight, a backup light, gloves, a dust mask, rope, water. Her phone, though she doubted it would be useful underground. Preparation steadied her hands. It gave shape to the unknown. When she opened the hatch again, the cold air felt familiar, no longer shocking. The ladder waited, rusted but solid, disappearing into darkness. She tested the first rung with her weight. It groaned but held. She tied the rope securely to the heavy cupboard and wrapped the other end around her waist, tightening the knot twice before trusting it. Then she climbed down. With every rung, the world above her shrank. The light from the storage room narrowed into a distant square. The sounds of the house faded, replaced by the echo of her own breathing and the faint metallic rasp of old iron. The air grew colder, heavier, preserved. When her foot finally touched solid ground, relief washed through her, followed immediately by awe. She stood in a narrow concrete space, barely wider than the shaft itself. The ceiling was low, damp with condensation. Ahead, a corridor stretched into darkness, its walls smooth concrete reinforced with steel. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Old wiring clung to the walls like veins. Dust lay thick beneath her feet, undisturbed. This was no cellar. She moved forward slowly, her flashlight cutting through the dark. Faded markings appeared on the walls. Numbers, arrows, stenciled letters worn nearly beyond recognition. Someone had planned this place with precision. It was not a shelter built in haste. It was infrastructure. The corridor widened, opening into a large chamber. Miriam stopped short, her breath catching. Rows of desks lined the walls, each fitted with radio equipment, telephones, switches frozen in time. Maps hung crookedly, yellowed and cracked, coastlines traced with careful markings. Filing cabinets stood open, drawers slightly ajar as if abandoned mid-task. Dust coated everything like ash. It felt wrong to move, as though the room expected its occupants to return at any moment. She walked slowly, touching nothing at first. A metal cup sat beside a chair. Reading glasses rested on a desk. Papers lay stacked, tied with brittle string. Nothing had been ransacked. Nothing had collapsed. The room had been sealed, not destroyed. At the far end, another corridor led away. She followed it and found sleeping quarters rows of narrow metal beds, some still neatly made. Blankets had faded into dull, indistinct colors. Personal belongings lay beside the beds. Dog tags, folded letters, photographs, watches stopped at different hours. Miriam picked up a photograph and brushed dust from its surface. A man in uniform stood smiling with two children at his side. Their faces felt impossibly alive. She lowered the photo carefully, a strange responsibility settling into her chest. As she explored deeper, unease crept in alongside wonder. Certain details did not align. Some doors were sealed shut, with welded metal that looked newer than the surrounding walls. Sections of concrete were smoother, lighter in color, patched decades after the original construction. In one room, old cloth-insulated wires abruptly transitioned into modern rubber-coated cables. Someone had been here long after the war. That realization tightened her chest. She returned to the surface hours later, exhausted and shaken, carrying the knowledge that the space beneath her home was far larger and more deliberate than she had imagined. She needed help, someone who understood construction, who could confirm what her instincts were telling her. Her neighbor Henry listened in silence as she explained. His expression shifted from curiosity to concentration. He did not laugh. He did not doubt. When he climbed down the ladder beside her later that afternoon, she knew she had chosen correctly. Henry moved through the bunker with practiced eyes. He ran his hands over the walls, examined welds, studied patched concrete. His conclusions were quiet but definitive. The bunker was real. It was built with wartime engineering of exceptional quality. And parts of it had been altered decades later, intentionally. Together, they traced a corridor that sloped downward, colder and damper than the rest. It ended abruptly in a wall of packed earth. Henry knelt, pushing aside loose soil, revealing concrete beneath. Not collapsed, buried. Someone had filled this passage on purpose. They did not dig further that day. The risk was too great. But the truth had already surfaced. This place had not been forgotten. It had been hidden. When Miriam lay in bed that night, she no longer wondered whether the house was alive. She understood now that it was guarding a lie, one buried carefully beneath layers of earth and silence. And whatever had been sealed away down there was not meant to be uncovered again. Yet she also knew she would return, because once a lie is exposed, it does not rest easily beneath the ground. The idea came to Miriam quietly, without ceremony, settling into her thoughts the way fog rolled in from the ocean. Slowly, inevitably. At first it felt almost absurd, a museum beneath her house. Yet every time she stood in the bunker's central chamber, surrounded by radios, maps, bunks, and abandoned lives, the word returned with greater clarity. This place was not meant to remain sealed. It had waited too long in darkness. She and Henry began carefully, methodically. They documented everything: photographs, notes, sketches of corridors and rooms. Henry reinforced weak sections of ceiling and installed temporary lighting, stringing cables that hummed softly through the silence. Dust was swept away inch by inch. Beds were straightened. Papers were stacked and catalogued. The bunker did not become cheerful, but it became legible. Its story easier to read. When Miriam told a few neighbors what she had found, their reactions surprised her. There was skepticism, of course, but also awe. Curiosity spread quietly, carried in low voices at the cafe, in glances exchanged along the street. A retired history teacher asked to see it. A young journalist requested a short visit. Miriam hesitated, then agreed. The first visitors walked through the bunker, slowly, reverently, their voices dropping to whispers without being asked. They traced fingers along the cold metal, stared at the maps, lingered in the sleeping quarters. The journalist's article was modest but respectful, calling the discovery a forgotten wartime nerve beneath a quiet town. It was enough. Interest grew, and with it, something else. The first sign was small. A typed note slipped under her front door late one evening. No envelope, no name. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Miriam stared at the words until the paper trembled in her hand. She told herself it was nothing. A prank, someone uncomfortable with attention. She folded the note and placed it in a drawer, refusing to let it poison her resolve. 2 days later, she found another message taped to her mailbox. "Stop before it's too late." That night, sleep abandoned her completely. Then came the cars. Unfamiliar vehicles passing slowly by her house. Idling briefly before moving on, the way one driver seemed to glance too long toward her yard. The feeling followed her through the days, a pressure between her shoulders, the sense of being watched without seeing eyes. She tried to focus on the work. The museum mattered. Giving the past a voice mattered. But fear had a way of slipping through cracks. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, she found a single boot print just outside her fence. Sharp, fresh, not Henry's, not hers. The soil around it was undisturbed, as if someone had stood there quietly, observing. The unease hardened into certainty the day she noticed something missing. At first she assumed it was her mistake. She retraced her steps, searched the communications room, checked her notes. But the absence remained. A folder of annotated maps, a small radio component. Items she remembered handling carefully, placing deliberately. They were gone. Henry confirmed it quickly. He moved through the bunker with narrowed eyes, pointing out subtle disturbances she had overlooked. A crate shifted slightly. Dust patterns broken where no visitors had walked. There was no forced entry, no damage. Whoever had come had moved with confidence. "This person knows the bunker," Henry said quietly. That realization chilled her more than the theft itself. They acted fast. Cameras were installed in corners where shadows pooled. Motion sensors near narrow corridors. Small, nearly invisible markers placed on the floor chalk dust. Loose debris arranged to betray a footprint. Simple tripwires tied to bells hidden behind crates. The bunker became what it once had been, a place of vigilance. Miriam made a decision then that surprised even herself. She did not close the museum. She reopened it. She announced regular visiting hours, posted flyers, spoke openly at the cafe. If someone wanted darkness, she would give them light. She would force the shadows to move. Visitors returned more than before. Families, elderly residents, children tugging at their parents' hands. The bunker filled with murmurs and footsteps. For brief moments, Miriam felt almost safe, until the cameras told another story. Late one night, Henry reviewed the footage with her. Grainy images flickered across the screen, a silhouette moving through a side corridor, a sleeve disappearing into darkness. Footprints leading deeper than the public paths allowed. "He's still coming," Henry said, "and he's going places we haven't shown anyone." The intruder wasn't finished. They decided to wait for him. After closing, the bunker fell silent. Lights were dimmed. Indicator LEDs on the cameras were covered. Miriam and Henry hid in separate rooms, walkie-talkies pressed to their palms, breath shallow in the cold air. Hours passed. The silence thickened. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, a scrape of boot against concrete, a shadow sliding along a wall. Miriam saw him first. The figure moved with practiced ease, avoiding traps, stepping only where dust had already been disturbed. He knelt beside a display and slipped something into his pocket. That was enough. She stepped forward, her flashlight snapping on, flooding the corridor with white light. At the same moment, Henry emerged from the opposite side, blocking the exit. The man froze. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. When the light settled on his face, recognition hit Miriam harder than fear. It was Adam, one of Henry's former workers, a man who had helped dig, who had listened quietly, who had walked these corridors beside them months ago. His shoulders sagged as if the fight had drained out of him completely. He did not run. He simply stood there, breathing hard, eyes lowered. The bunker held its breath. Miriam realized then that the greatest danger had not come from strangers in the dark, but from someone who had been trusted to walk in the light. For a long moment, no one moved. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in Miriam's hand, illuminating Adam's face, pale, drawn, stripped of the quiet confidence she remembered from the early days of excavation. He looked smaller here, standing among the shadows of history he had tried to steal. The bunker, once again, felt like a witness. Henry broke the silence first. "What did you take?" His voice was low, controlled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Adam swallowed. His eyes flicked once toward the corridor behind him, then dropped to the floor. When he spoke, his voice came out uneven, as if each word had to be forced past something tight in his chest. "Only what they asked for," he said. "Maps, certain reports, anything that mentioned coastal operations, coded movements." "Who is they?" Miriam asked. Adam shook his head. "People who pay. People who don't ask questions, but expect answers." The words settled heavily between them. They moved to the communications room, away from the narrow corridors, the tension following like a physical presence. Adam sat on a metal chair, his hands clenched together. Under the harsh light, the truth began to spill out, not dramatically, not with defiance, but with exhaustion. He spoke of debts that had grown faster than he could outrun them, of losing work, of desperation that made impossible choices feel inevitable. When he first helped uncover the bunker, he had recognized its value immediately, not as history, but as currency. Collectors paid enormous sums for artifacts tied to forgotten military sites, not museums, private buyers, people who wanted pieces of the past without the burden of context. At first, Adam claimed, he had taken nothing important, small items. Tests, when no one noticed, when the museum plans began and attention grew, the pressure intensified. They wanted specific things. They knew what to ask for. "They knew what was here," Adam said quietly. "Better than I did." Miriam felt a cold clarity settle over her. This had never been random. The notes, the surveillance, the precision. The bunker had not only been hidden once, it had been remembered. Henry's jaw tightened. "You endangered everything," he said. "Her home, this place." "I know," Adam replied. "I never meant for it to go this far." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Miriam stood and walked slowly toward one of the maps still pinned to the wall. She stared at the faded ink, the careful lines drawn by hands long gone. Calling the police would be easy. Expected. It would also end everything. The bunker would become evidence. Her home would become a problem. The history she had fought to preserve would be swallowed by procedures and sealed away once more. She turned back to Adam. "You're going to return everything," she said. "All of it. No conditions." He nodded immediately. "I will, I swear." "And you'll show us where you hid it." Relief flooded his face, followed quickly by something else. Shame. Yes. Over the next several days, they recovered what had been taken. A storage locker on the edge of town, a shed behind an abandoned property, a shallow pit near the old docks, carefully concealed beneath warped boards. One by one, the artifacts returned, wrapped, protected, intact. Adam had never intended to destroy them, only to sell them. But not everything came back. Some documents, Adam admitted, had already been handed over, to whom he claimed he didn't know. He had never seen faces, only intermediaries. That knowledge lingered like a bruise. Still, Miriam moved forward. They sealed every hidden entrance Adam revealed, reinforced weak points, installed permanent surveillance and alarms. The bunker grew safer, stronger, less vulnerable to shadows. Adam stayed on not as a thief, but as labor, repairing, reinforcing, making amends in the only way he could. When the day of the official reopening arrived, the town gathered in numbers Miriam had never imagined. Local officials, journalists, families, children who stared wide-eyed at the machinery, elderly residents who whispered fragments of half-remembered stories. Miriam stood at the entrance, her voice steady as she welcomed them. The bunker no longer felt threatening. It felt alive, its silence filled with meaning instead of fear. Applause echoed against concrete walls built for war. When the last visitor left and the lights dimmed, Miriam walked alone through the corridors. She paused in the observation chamber, resting her hand on the cold metal of an old scope. Beneath her palm, she felt no menace, only weight, responsibility. As she climbed the ladder back into her home, the ocean's distant sound returned to her ears. The house felt different now, lighter. She had come here seeking shelter. Instead, she had become a guardian. The truth beneath her home had tried to hide, to frighten, to be taken piece by piece. She had chosen to face it openly. And because of that, it would remain no longer buried, no longer silent. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Share this video with someone who loves real mysteries and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden beneath our feet. She didn't search for the truth found her first. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. More real mysteries are coming next.